The flickering light of the birthday candles danced across her face, illuminating the cruel twist of her lips. It was her 60th birthday. A milestone, a celebration, or so it was supposed to be. The grand dining room, usually filled with boisterous laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes, had fallen into an unnatural hush. All eyes were on her, my mother, Eleanor Vance, as she leaned over the elaborate cake, a confection of white fondant and delicate sugar flowers. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I had watched her all evening, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. She had been unusually quiet, her gaze lingering on me with an intensity that felt less like affection and more like a predator sizing up its prey. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a familiar companion in our family gatherings. I knew, deep down, that something was coming. It always did. She took a deep breath, the flames on the candles bending slightly with her exhale. Then, her voice, usually so melodious and refined, cut through the silence like a shard of ice. "I wish you were never born." The words hung in the air, suspended, heavy, suffocating. They weren't whispered, they were spoken with chilling clarity, directed squarely at me. My breath hitched. The room, indeed, went silent. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered family and friends, quickly followed by an awkward, horrified stillness. My father, usually quick to smooth over any social faux pas, stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. My older sister, Clara, who had always been Mother's favorite, averted her gaze, a faint flush creeping up her neck. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft crackle of the burning wicks, a macabre soundtrack to the shattering of my world. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a sudden, overwhelming wave of unreality. Had she really just said that? On her own birthday? In front of everyone? The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. But beneath the humiliation, a deeper, colder emotion began to stir, a profound sense of finality. This was it, the breaking point, the moment I had unconsciously been bracing for my entire life. I remember standing there, rooted to the spot, feeling every single eye in the room bore into me. The pity, the shock, the morbid curiosity, it was all too much. My cheeks burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not now, not for her. A strange calm settled over me, a clarity born from absolute devastation. This was it, the breaking point, the moment I had unconsciously been bracing for my entire life. Slowly, deliberately, I turned. My gaze swept across the faces of my family, my father, who had always prioritized peace over my well-being, Clara, who thrived on Mother's approval and my constant diminishment, the aunts and uncles who had witnessed countless such scenes but always remained silent. There was no comfort there, no solace, no defense, just a sea of complicity and discomfort. Without a word, I walked towards the double doors leading out of the dining room. Each step was heavy, deliberate, a declaration. I didn't run. I didn't stumble. I simply walked, my back straight, my head held high, though my heart was crumbling into dust inside my chest. The silence followed me, a palpable presence, until the doors swung shut behind me with a soft click, severing me from the scene, from them, from a lifetime of pain. The cool night air hit me like a physical shock as I stepped out of the mansion. The manicured lawns, usually so inviting, felt alien, hostile. I walked past the parked luxury cars, past the hushed whispers of the valets, past the security gates that had always felt more like a cage than a boundary. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The words echoed in my mind, a relentless, torturous refrain. "I wish you were never born." It wasn't just a casual insult. It was a repudiation of my very existence. And it wasn't the first time I had felt it, though never so explicitly. From my earliest memories, I had been the unwanted child, the inconvenient truth in my mother's perfectly curated life. Clara, 2 years my senior, was the golden child, beautiful, compliant, effortlessly charming. I was the opposite, quiet, observant, and, to my mother, perpetually disappointing. I remember a time when I was 5, excitedly showing her a drawing I had made, a vibrant, messy explosion of colors. Clara's drawings were always neat, precise, perfect. Mother had glanced at mine, her lips pursed, and simply said, "That's interesting, Amelia, but perhaps you should try to stay within the lines next time. Look at Clara's." The comparison was constant, a subtle knife twisting in my young heart. Every achievement was met with a lukewarm response, every mistake magnified. My successes were dismissed as luck, my failures as inherent flaws. As I grew older, the emotional abuse became more sophisticated, more insidious. It wasn't just about comparisons anymore. It was about invalidation. My feelings were always too sensitive, my opinions naive, my dreams unrealistic. When I expressed a desire to pursue art, my mother scoffed, "Art? Darling, that's a hobby, not a career. You need to be practical. Look at Clara, she's already interning at your father's firm." The message was clear. I was not enough, I would never be enough, and my very presence was a burden, a constant reminder of some perceived imperfection in her perfect world. The night air grew colder, but I barely noticed. My mind was a whirlwind of memories, each one a fresh sting. The time she had forgotten my birthday, only to remember Clara's with lavish parties. The way she would introduce me to her friends, always adding a caveat. "This is Amelia, my younger daughter. She's artistic." The pause, the slight shrug, the unspoken implication that artistic was a polite euphemism for unsuccessful or odd. I walked for hours, the city lights blurring through my unshed tears. The pain was immense, but so was a strange sense of liberation. The cord had been cut, the illusion shattered. There was no going back, no pretending that things could ever be different. The silence in that room, the shocked faces, her chilling words, they had finally given me the undeniable truth. I was free. Free to be unwanted, yes, but also free to finally stop seeking validation from a source that would never provide it. The path ahead was uncertain, terrifying, but for the first time in my life it was mine to forge, unburdened by the crushing weight of her expectations and her disdain. I ended up at a small, dimly lit diner, the kind that never closes, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the worn vinyl booths. I ordered a black coffee, my hands still trembling as I wrapped them around the warm mug. The steam rose, momentarily obscuring my face, a welcome shield from the world. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the bitter taste of the coffee a stark contrast to the sweetness of the birthday cake I had left behind. The words replayed in my mind, an endless loop of torment. "I wish you were never born." Each syllable was a hammer blow, shattering the last vestiges of hope I had clung to for so long. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. What now? I had no plan, no destination. My entire life had been lived under the shadow of my mother's disapproval, my identity shaped by her constant comparisons to Clara. I had always been the quiet one, the observer, the one who faded into the background. Now, there was no background to fade into. I was adrift, untethered, and terrifyingly alone. I paid for my coffee and walked out into the pre-dawn chill. The city was slowly waking up, but I felt like I was still trapped in a nightmare. I had a small emergency fund, money I had saved from odd jobs and the occasional allowance from my father, who, in his own quiet way, sometimes tried to compensate for my mother's cruelty. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a few nights in a cheap motel. That became my immediate goal, a place to sleep, a place to think. The next few weeks were a blur of cheap motels, instant noodles, and endless introspection. I called no one. No one called me. My father, I knew, would be too afraid of my mother's wrath to reach out directly. Clara would likely be relieved, her position as the undisputed favorite now solidified. The silence from my family was deafening, confirming what I had always suspected. I was truly dispensable. I spent my days walking, exploring parts of the city I had never seen, trying to outrun the ghosts of my past. I visited art galleries, sat in parks, and watched strangers live their lives, wondering if they too carried such invisible wounds. One afternoon, I found myself in a small independent bookstore, drawn in by the scent of old paper and coffee. It was a cozy, cluttered space, filled with mismatched armchairs and shelves overflowing with books. I picked up a worn copy of a poetry anthology, losing myself in the rhythm of the words, finding a strange comfort in the shared human experience of pain and resilience. The owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a shock of bright purple hair, noticed me. Her name was Beatrice, and she had a gentle smile that seemed to radiate warmth. We started talking, first about books, then about life. I found myself, to my own surprise, confiding in her. I didn't tell her the full, brutal truth of my mother's words, but I spoke of feeling lost, of a sudden, unexpected rupture with my family. Beatrice listened patiently, her gaze unwavering, her presence a balm to my raw nerves. "Sometimes, dear," she said, her voice soft but firm, "the greatest freedom comes from letting go of what was never truly yours to begin with. A family is not just blood, Amelia. It's about love, support, and acceptance. And if you don't find it where you expect, you build it elsewhere." Her words resonated deeply. They were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. Beatrice offered me a part-time job at the bookstore, dusting shelves, organizing books, and helping customers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a purpose. It was a reason to get up in the morning. Working at the bookstore became my sanctuary. The quiet hum of conversation, the rustle of turning pages, the smell of coffee and old books. It was a world away from the suffocating grandeur of my childhood home. Beatrice became a mentor, a surrogate grandmother, a beacon of unconditional kindness. She encouraged my love for art, something my mother had always dismissed. She bought me a small sketchbook and a set of watercolors, urging me to express myself. "Your heart is full of stories, Amelia," she would say. "Don't let anyone tell you they're not worth telling." I started painting again, tentatively at first, then with a fierce, almost desperate passion. I painted the cityscapes I had walked through, the faces of strangers, the quiet corners of the bookstore. My art became a way to process the trauma, to channel the pain into something beautiful, something tangible. It was messy, imperfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt a sense of genuine accomplishment, a quiet pride that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. Life was still hard, money was tight, and the memories of that night still haunted my dreams. There were days when the loneliness was overwhelming, when the urge to call my father, to beg for a return to the familiar, no matter how toxic, was almost unbearable. But then I would remember the silence, the coldness, the absolute repudiation in my mother's eyes, and the resolve would harden again. I wouldn't go back. I couldn't. One day, a letter arrived at the bookstore, addressed to me. It was from Clara. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a short, formal note, informing me that my mother had been diagnosed with a serious illness. "She's asking for you," Clara wrote, "though she won't admit it directly. Father thinks you should come home." My heart ached, a complex mix of emotions swirling within me. Pity for my mother, yes, but also a deep-seated resentment. Was this her way of finally acknowledging me? Or was it just another attempt to exert control, to pull me back into her orbit? I thought of Beatrice's words, letting go of what was never truly yours. I thought of the peace I had found in my new, quiet life. I thought of the art I was creating, the person I was becoming. I wrote a reply, carefully choosing my words. I expressed my sympathy for my mother's illness, wished her well, and stated that I would not be returning. I explained, as gently as I could, that I had found my own path, and that my place was no longer with them. It was the hardest letter I had ever written, a final severing of the ties that had bound me for so long. But as I mailed it, a profound sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about self-preservation, about choosing my own well-being over a toxic loyalty. The years that followed were a testament to resilience. I continued to work at the bookstore, saving every penny. I took art classes at a local community college, honing my skills, experimenting with different mediums. My paintings began to sell, first to customers at the bookstore, then at local art fairs. It was a slow, arduous climb, but every step felt like a victory. I was building something, not just a career, but a life, brick by brick, on my own terms. Beatrice was my biggest cheerleader. She displayed my art in the bookstore, introduced me to local artists, and encouraged me to pursue my dreams with unwavering faith. She taught me that true strength wasn't about enduring pain, but about transforming it. She showed me that family wasn't just about shared genes, but about shared values, shared laughter, and shared burdens. She was the mother I had always longed for, the one who saw my worth, who celebrated my uniqueness, who loved me unconditionally. I learned to trust my own instincts, to listen to my own voice, something I had never been allowed to do growing up. The constant self-doubt that had plagued me for so long slowly began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence. I was no longer the girl who wished she had never been born. I was Amelia, the artist, the independent woman, the survivor. And I was finally, truly, enough. The opening of my first solo art exhibition was a whirlwind of emotions. The gallery space, bathed in soft, warm light, showcased my journey. From the dark, introspective pieces born from my pain to the vibrant, hopeful canvases that reflected my healing and growth. Beatrice stood beside me, her eyes shining with pride, her hand a comforting weight on my arm. My heart swelled with gratitude for this woman who had seen me, truly seen me, when no one else would. The room was filled with people I had met along my journey. Fellow artists, loyal customers from the bookstore, new friends who had become my chosen family. There was laughter, genuine smiles, and the hum of appreciative conversation. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, a testament to the life I had built from the ashes of my past. As I mingled, a familiar face caught my eye. It was Clara, my sister. She stood awkwardly by the entrance, dressed impeccably as always, a stark contrast to the bohemian atmosphere of the gallery. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen her or heard from her since I mailed that letter years ago. My mother had passed away a few months after I sent my refusal to return, a fact I learned from an obituary in the local paper. There had been no further contact, no attempts at reconciliation. Clara approached me, her expression unreadable. "Amelia," she said, her voice a little softer than I remembered. "This is impressive." "Clara," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the announcement in the paper," she explained, gesturing vaguely. "Father thought, well, he thought I should come. See how you're doing." A cynical part of me wondered if Father had also suggested she assess my financial success to see if I had finally become respectable enough for the family. But I pushed the thought away. I was no longer that insecure girl seeking their approval. "I'm doing well," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips. "Very well, actually." She looked around the gallery, her gaze lingering on a large canvas depicting a lone figure walking away from a grand, imposing house. The sky above it a tumultuous mix of dark clouds and a single piercing ray of sunlight. It was a self-portrait of sorts, a visual representation of the night I left. "Mother, she never really understood you, did she?" Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I had ever heard from her. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just the favored daughter, but a woman who had also been shaped, perhaps even trapped, by our mother's expectations. "No," I agreed softly. "She didn't. But I think I finally understand her. And more importantly, I understand myself." We talked for a while longer, a stilted, cautious conversation. She told me about my father, who was aging, and about her own life, which sounded as meticulously planned and emotionally sterile as I remembered. There was no grand reconciliation, no sudden outpouring of sisterly affection. But there was a quiet understanding, a fragile bridge built on shared history and unspoken truths. As she left, she paused at the door. "Amelia," she said, turning back, "I'm glad you found your way." I nodded, a small, sad smile on my face. It wasn't the family reunion I might have once dreamed of, but it was enough. It was closure. In the years that followed, my art career flourished. I opened my own studio, taught workshops, and traveled the world, drawing inspiration from different cultures and landscapes. My work became known for its raw emotion, its vibrant colors, and its underlying message of hope and resilience. I often thought of my mother's words, "I wish you were never born," but they no longer held power over me. They were a distant echo, a painful memory that had ultimately propelled me towards a life of authenticity and purpose. I never forgot the kindness of strangers, the chosen family who had nurtured me when my own had cast me aside. Beatrice remained a constant presence in my life until her passing, her wisdom and love a guiding light. I established a foundation in her name, providing scholarships for aspiring artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring that others had the support and encouragement I had once desperately needed. My life was full of passion, full of creativity, full of love. I had built a home, not just a physical space, but a sanctuary for my soul, filled with the people and pursuits that brought me joy. I had learned that self-worth wasn't something granted by others, but something cultivated from within. It wasn't about being enough for someone else, but about realizing I was inherently enough, just as I was. Sometimes I would sit in my studio surrounded by my canvases and reflect on that night. The flickering candles, the cruel words, the suffocating silence. It had been the most devastating moment of my life, but it had also been the catalyst for everything that followed. It had forced me to confront the truth, to break free from a cycle of emotional abuse, and to embark on a journey of self-discovery that ultimately led me to my true self. The Vance family had tried to define me, to diminish me, to erase me. But my mother's final, brutal act had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose my own path, to define my own worth, and to build a life where I was not just wanted, but celebrated. I was born, and I was here, and I was thriving. And that, I realized, was the most powerful rebuttal of all.